For some of you, these slides might be difficult to see, so I'll read some of the text. Don't worry about it. We've got about 30 minutes. My hope is to rush through some slides and then let you ask the really tough questions. There isn't a question you shouldn't ask. Doesn't mean I'll have the answer, but please do ask the question. I couldn't think of a title because I got an email that said it was a Changemakers Breakfast, and I was like, I remember talking to my daughter. I said, I don't think of myself as that, and I don't want to go down to South Carolina and be a New Yorker that's coming to tell them about change. That's silly. That is silly. And I see that. I was just telling Phil, we do work overseas, and I see that when I go overseas, people from the United States and Europe come in and telling other people how to live their lives. I'm like, I can't do that. But then last night, Bev was giving me a ride back, and she said something 3 times, and I said, that's the title. She said, how do we do better for kids? So the title to this slide is, how do we do better for kids? But before we get there, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, because from the day I landed here at 1 o'clock yesterday, I've been asked at least 10 times where I'm from, including at coffee this morning. And I guess it's okay, because in New York, my accent doesn't matter. But here, it's a curiosity. I'm the son of a very young Buddhist monk that had a salvation experience, gave up the robes, and married a Sephardic Jewish British family. My mom is British. They became medical missionaries. They went to train in Sweden, adopted 4 children and 3 biological. I'm the oldest of the biological children. We grew up in Emporia, Kansas, a small rural community 100 miles from Kansas City. That's where I came of age. And the young lady that checked me in yesterday at the Charleston Place Hotel was from Emporia, Kansas. Can you believe this? It's crazy. All I wanted to be was a military officer. On my mom's side, I have 3 generations of British military. And I enrolled in ROTC, I went to Fort Riley, but while I was there, my captain asked me to volunteer in a group home. I'd never been to a group home. I had no idea what it was. There were 14 boys in this home, and on that first night, I realized that they didn't think of home as I did. In fact, they couldn't think of home because they thought of that house they lived in as the closest thing to home, and the other 13 young men there were family. And I was stunned by that, really stunned by that. I came back, I started working there. And, but then my father, who is Asian, had a problem with what he thought I was doing, even though he had done things differently to his family. He said, you know, you need to do more. And in Asian society, you are a doctor, attorney, lawyer, maybe a public servant, and then you're the Taliban. There's really nothing in the middle there, right? So I said, you know, Dad, I don't want to be a doctor like you. I don't want to be, that's not my thing. I'll be a neuropsychologist. So I did go to New York. I got a PhD. I practiced as a neuropsychologist. I hated it. And I called my mom one day, and she said, why do you listen to your dad? I said, well, Mom, you know, I'm the oldest. I want to make you guys happy. She said, listen, just go do something you like to do. And here I am, doing something I like to do. I am also a dad. So a lot of what I'm going to talk to you today comes from my experience of being a father myself to Nicholas, Jordan, and Abigail. So we're going to do a couple things. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the organization. I've told you a little bit about myself. I'm going to tell you how we see the problem. I'm going to ask you to stop, at some point, try to stop the intellectual understanding of the problem and see whether you can understand it viscerally. because this work is about the heart. And then I'm going to run through a couple slides and tell you of the things that we've learned in our work that inspire us every day. And this is the work that I do with my team that allows us to get up every morning and say, we can do this. We can do hard work, and this is hard work. So, the Children's Village was founded in 1851. It's not an orphanage. I know the story is different here. You only came to Children's Village if you were arrested for a crime. And most of the crimes were survival crimes in New York City. Food, mostly. So these were the Oliver Twist stories of New York City, right? Not the London experience. We had 1,200 kids when the campus was in Manhattan. We also influenced the Indian schools. The immersion education program of the Indian schools came out of the Children's Village experience. How many of you have heard of the Orphan Train? The Orphan Train was founded by the Children's Village and 2 large New York City charities that still exist today. There's a 6-volume book on the children that went from Children's Village on the Orphan Train. The first train from New York were children that went from Children's Village. 250,000 children from New York, Boston, and Philadelphia were taken to Chicago and then all the way down to Nebraska and given to families. Less than 40% of them were truly orphans. They were mostly non-English speaking European immigrants, Ashkenazi Jews, and later some Catholic children. The Orphan Train continues until 1929. That's recent history, my friends. Harlem Dowling, the agency that is part of us, was the first African American institution in the United States founded for African American children, and the first institution that was burnt in New York City during the draft riots. Still exists, and it's one of our pride and joy. You can't see this slide, so I'll tell you a little bit about what you should know about the organization today. We are no longer residential. Residential care makes up about 30% of our work. We serve in 43 public schools. We do a lot of prevention. We do a lot of community building. The median age of the youngsters that we serve in residential care is almost 17 now. We are responsible for about 3,600 children on any given night in the greater New York City area. We serve in Haiti, Iraq, El Salvador, at the southern border on family finding. And this is something I'm really proud about. Because in New York City housing is a real crisis, and because children that age out of the system are constantly in shelters, we've started building in Manhattan, and we've proved that you can actually build studio apartments in the city that are beautiful, that can rent for $65 a month. And our next big project in Manhattan, which is almost 60% complete, will bring 2-bedroom apartments on market for under $550 a month. Where you live matters, where you go to school matters, who you're born to matters. Those 3 things have defined our experience in this room. And we owe it to the people we serve to give them the things that we give ourselves, right? So here's the problem in the United States, and this is something that I learned in that group home so long ago, and something that I keep learning from my mother, who is still alive, that reminds me, family separation is a problem. Family separation is a problem. Families are not perfect, but when you take children away from the only thing they trust, it's a problem. Now, to those of us in this room, this slide is not new. But to all our friends, they think that when we think of foster care, when we talk of child welfare, they think of abuse. Well, that's not true. We have 33 years of data in the United States that comes pretty close to this number every year. 75% of the children we remove from families, we remove for neglect, not for abuse. Abuse is a tiny, tiny piece of of the family separation paradigm. And sexual abuse is even smaller. Neglect, which is often closely associated with poverty, is the reason that we remove children. There are two powerful drivers in the United States that allow us to do this. One is this idea that poor people are different to us. That poor people don't care about their children as we do. When I was in Kansas and I remembered in that group home, not being a social worker, I remember going to the staff and they all love their job and they're my friends to this day and they're amazing people. I said, hey, what's the deal? Why aren't these kids home? Like, why are they here on Thanksgiving and why am I like here? They were like, well, you know, their families don't care. Their families are lazy. They don't want to drive to have Thanksgiving with these children. We were wrong. They didn't want to come because they didn't think they were welcome. I learned that the next year that I was there. This idea that poor people don't care for their children the way we do is a powerful driver in our system. So you can't see this slide either. When the system was entirely white at Children's Village, and the kids were Ashkenazi Jews, non-English speaking European immigrants, there were no kids of color. Nobody cared if you were a kid of color and you were poor. You could be dead on the street or in jail. These kids, their parents were also seen, and here I have it talks about the then president of Children's Village talking about these kids as broken, their families as lazy, as delinquent, and he even uses the phrase, and this is in our board minutes, feeble-minded. Feeble-minded. When I came to Children's Village, this is the first picture I took of boys, a group of boys, almost 100 of them. The New York Times wrote an article about these young men. They had all spent more than 10 years in the residential care system. They were all over 14. And we put them as a cohort into a group and said, we're going to find these kids' families. Every one of these young men had a label, oppositional, defiant. I remember going to my chief psychiatrist and said, what the hell, what exactly does that mean? Like, that's something my father would have called me when I said I didn't want to be a doctor. Well, what does that exactly mean? They all had the label oppositional, defiant. My point? We label things easily when we think people are very different to us. Let's over there. Labels are powerful. You know, in psychology, we call them mental schema. When you create a schematic in your head about a group of people, you can do terrible things to them because you stop thinking of them as individuals. So when we see poor families struggling and we make assumptions about their love, it is easy for us to justify removal. When we see poor families struggling and we make assumptions about their love for their children, it's easy to justify removal. Here's the second big driver in our system, and you know this, race. Race. While the vast majority of children separated from their families in the United States are still poor and white, the disproportionate impact is on kids of color. With black families being separated faster, their children entering the system faster, going up the levels of security faster, they stay longer, they exit with the worst outcomes. 26 years of data. No question about that. Only one other group in the United States come close to the black family's experience. Tribal children. In every one of our tribes, we see the same data. In every one of our tribes. With the black family, the labels are no different. The labels are, they don't care, they're not trying hard enough, they're very unlike me. We can do better. Removal is always followed by this idea that we can do better. So this is not an issue of intent here. I'm not suggesting that people out there are just attacking families. What I'm saying is we are often misguided because of the way we think about that family. Black families are often described as damaged, dangerous to children, dangerous to communities, untrustworthy, taking advantage of systems, and then you end up with this idea, well, if all those are true, let's save their children. If you come to the Children's Village and you come with me to Columbia University, they maintain our records from 1848 on. Every one of these concepts was applied to Ashkenazi Jewish children, to Catholic children, and to non-Anglo immigrant children that came from Eastern Europe, because they were seen as different. There's a letter that was sent to our board president that says Children's Village integrated its Manhattan campus in 1860. And there's a letter that says, you know, first you brought the Jews, then you brought the Catholics that worship the Pope. Now you brought the blacks. That's it, you got to go. That's the content of the letter. Same feeling. Right? And I think it said, you brought the Jews that crucified Christ, I think is what it said. So, we save kids. We separate them. Now here is where this gets technical. You have all these young kids in the system, many of them under 13. In some of the backward residential programs, we see a lot more under 13-year-old kids still in the system. I've been to some of those places. But very quickly, these kids, as they age up, they become the bad kids. There are movies made about them. There are stories written about them. There are TikTok videos about them. I kid you not. What happens? How do the kids we saved from those bad parents so quickly become the bad kids? There's a reason for why this is happening. There's a reason why there are movies about kids coming out of foster care that are struggling. Right? You've seen these movies, right? Some of them are pretty well known. Go back with me to Psych 101, Maslow's hierarchy. You get the physiological. You're born, you breathe some air, you're good. Okay, I'm alive. Your mom swaddles you. Those of you who are parents, you know that feeling. You know, I got ya. I remember doing that with Nicholas when he was my firstborn. And then all you know from that moment on is love and belonging. Right? Those of you who are parents, and those of you who are not. You belong, you're loved, you're loved, you're loved. Think of our kids that have been removed. We promise them family, but they don't get it. They age in the system. They age in the system. The absence of love and belonging has consequences. Let's see if we can get this. All the things that we want young people to have. You know, I've spoken to some of our best donors who say, hey, you know, are they going to college? I'm like, no, he's not going to college. But I'm going to keep him out of jail and give him a family, and maybe he'll go to college when he's 25. Because there's so much that he missed that cannot be fixed by money anymore. Money doesn't fix love and belonging. To be loved and belonged, and to belong, is something you don't understand. Do this with me. Take a deep breath and hold it. Exhale slowly. Now, unless you have asthma or emphysema, you did not think about breathing right now. Until I told you to hold your breath. You were just breathing. That's what it means to be loved and to belong. you don't think about love and belonging because you have it. That's the closest analogy I can give you. We don't think about love because we have it. You don't worry about belonging because you have it. But years ago, a young man told me something that I've never forgotten. He said, I am so afraid I feel like I'm drowning. And that's how I came about that one small exercise. To not know who loves you and to not know who you belong to feels like you're drowning. Feels like you're drowning. And you're in pain. You're in pain. That's all you're thinking about. Who loves me? I remember in that group home that I was at, and at Children's Village, I've seen this. I don't want to talk about Thanksgiving. It's not because I don't want to talk about Thanksgiving. I don't want to be reminded that I'm the only one that doesn't have a home to go to. Or I don't want to be reminded that I'm the only one that will not have someone come and visit me on that Thursday. So don't fucking talk to me. That's what pain feels like. It's incredible pain. It's incredible pain. Now, love and belonging is recognizable once you are attuned to it. Here are some things that you and I take for granted, and that my children, Nicholas, Jordan, and Abigail, take for granted every day, much to their chagrin, because two of them are teenagers and they don't want to be loved that way anymore. One, when you're loved and when you belong, you're included. When you're loved and when you belong, you're treated as important. When you're loved and you belong, you're always supported because you know you've always have someone that's got your back. When you are loved and you belong, you're always encouraged. When you're loved and when you belong, people celebrate you. They celebrate you. Think of all the affirmations you shower on the people you love, even when they don't deserve it. My mom still does that to me. I'm like, Mom, come on. No, it's not that good. When people love you, they listen to you and they embrace you. Now, to those of you who know foster care, think of the children you know right now. Can you tell me that any one of them is getting at least two of these things today? Can I tell you that I have a couple hundred children at Children's Village today that won't get it either? I'm not ashamed to say it. The lack of belonging equals pain, and pain is debilitating. I want to use a word that we probably don't use as often, but that word is perseverate. You know what it means to perseverate? It's when the pain is so great that every morning you wake up, that's the first thing you think about. Think of pain in your own life. When you lost someone, if it's a relationship, someone you loved, and you wake up every morning and that's all you think about. And it consumes you. And it impacts your thinking. And when people try to get close to you, you push them away because you don't know how to communicate the pain you're going through. It is hard to focus on anything else when that pain is dominant. Our children cannot focus on all the things we tell them and all the things we tell our donors we do because they don't know who they belong to. Okay, belonging is the work we do. If you're not in the belonging game, if you think residential care or foster care is a solution, I'm sorry, my friends, you're wrong. You're wrong. You're absolutely wrong. Belonging is what we need to fight for. That's the battle. That's the hard work. It's the most difficult work we do. And it's a very simple solution. It's the same thing that worked for you and me. The people that love us give us two qualities of love. One is that unconditional nature, right? Every one of you If you don't have one person, let me know, because there's always an interesting story. But most of us have at least one. Most of you, as I tell my children, they have people that love them in 3 continents. And some of you probably do too. So you have that concept of unconditional love. The other concept is one we don't talk about, but it's incredibly important. It's not just love. It's intrinsic love. That means that people love you for who you are right now, not for who you'll be. My mom loved me when I told her I was going to do something else. She didn't know what that would be. She loved me. I love my children even when they push me away. Like, Dad, don't park by my dorm and walk up, is what Abby tells me. I'm like, honey, okay, I'll park at the back and I'll walk through the back. Intrinsic love is, I love you for who you are right now, not for who you'll be. With your accent, with your big nose, your big eyes, with your bad habits, I love you. Children need unconditional love, and they need intrinsic love. So many of the children in our system are promised conditional love. Conditional love doesn't fill that hole, my friends, which is why our kids run away. They know it. Kids, I work with young people that have gone through 20 homes, so do you. And in half of those cases, they were like, yeah, that wasn't real. What are they saying? There was no love there. That was another bed. Okay, let's run through some quick slides here. Poverty does not equal child harm. Poverty does not mean trauma. Many of us, me included, my family started really poor. When my dad left the temple, he was excommunicated. And mom and dad started life together with nothing. And many of you have stories of that. Poverty is not the limitation. It's when people intervene in your lives and take away things you love. That's what breaks you down. Poor families love their children. I know that sounds stupid to say, but in our system, we need to be reminded of this. Poor families love their children just as you and I do. Poor families enjoy deeply fulfilling lives. They may be poor, but they have amazing lives. Child welfare is not a solution to poverty. It never was. It's a lie. It's a lie. I know I fall into that trap too sometimes, thinking, yeah, we can do something more. Child welfare is not a solution to poverty. It's not a surgical instrument. It's a blunt instrument that is harmful, even when it's well-intended. Neglect in our system is primary, not abuse. I insist on reminding myself not to use the phrase abuse and neglect when I speak. It's neglect and abuse. Big difference. Another phrase that we use at Children's Village is, we don't work with bad kids. We work with kids to whom bad things have happened. It's a subtle difference there, but we don't work with bad kids. We work with kids to whom bad things have happened. Substance abuse dependence confounds neglect. I threw this in here because I know we have some providers. This is a tricky one. We work with a lot of upper middle class and wealthy families in our work, because New York City and New York State has a lot of diversity. In middle class and upper middle class families, substance abuse doesn't always lead to a removal, because the family or the person has a lot of support around them. But in socially isolated family units, the problem with substance abuse is that 2 things could happen. One is you could be alone without support, and you need the drugs so much that you open the door to a stranger that could put your children at risk. Because children are always at risk when strangers are not supervised, right? That's true to all our families. Not that all strangers are bad. It's just that if you're with my children and you're a stranger, you're supervised. So you open the door because someone says, I'll bring it. I've got it. Let's do it together. But you've got children there. The second problem is the draw of the drug could become so strong that you make that momentary lapse in judgment to say, my kids will be okay, let me close this door, and I'll go out and I'll get it and I'll come back. A lot of things could happen as you go out. You may not come back. You may come back and you may bring back the wrong people again into your home. So substance abuse definitely confounds this problem of neglect. Color, religion does not equal to child harm. The pathology narrative of brokenness is the historical narrative of child welfare in the United States. We always approach this concept of helping children with the need to also say something is broken. Think about all the things that have happened in our own families that just happened. Regardless of how much wealth you have, bad things happen to all families. It didn't mean that something was broken. Something just happened. We've got to retrain ourselves to think that when we see a need with a child, it does not mean that something is broken. It sometimes simply means that there is a need that needs to be met. Good intent and anecdote is not evidence. Evidence is evidence. We need more evidence, which is why the Family First Act, depending on where you stand, we asked for evidence. I mean, that was the longest battle we fought on that. We insisted that money should be tied to evidence. Government and charity is never a substitute for family love and belonging. Children's Village is a charity. We have huge government contracts. Many of you are charities. You have government contracts. We are no substitute for family. Not even close. On my best day at Children's Village, we suck when it comes to family. We can't do it. I wouldn't want my children at Children's Village. I wouldn't. I mean, look, we invest tons of money. We have beautiful buildings, great campuses, swimming pools. That's not family. That's not family. Long slide, I'll read it out. When it comes to the poor and the disenfranchised that we serve, we are bureaucratic, we have no customer service, we are horrible. No one gets treated in our system the way I would want my family treated, not even on the best day. That is not because we don't want to. It's just because how the system works. Government and charity is burdensome, my friends. If you don't agree with me, raise your hand because I'd like to know how much of it more you want in your life. None of us wants more government and charity in our lives. That doesn't mean that charity isn't good. It doesn't mean that government isn't good. But we don't want it in our lives. We should not impose it on the families we serve. Amazing things happen to life when you're chosen and you're loved. Two important words in our work. Very few people choose our children. Very few people shake hands with our children. Very few people embrace our children. Our children are often not invited to places. They're not allowed. But think of your life just as mine. I am the product of people who chose me. People chose me. They chose me in Kansas. They chose me in New York. They loved me. They made me sit at the table. They exposed me. I am pretty unsophisticated, but not embarrassed because I've been around people that are sophisticated that have helped me not embarrass myself. So I'm confident. I don't need to pretend. That's how we get through life. Because people choose you and they love you to be part of something greater. If you don't know what it means not to be loved, at least think back to high school when you may not have been the smartest, coolest, best looking person. Maybe many of you probably were, but I was not. If you're still confused by those slides, try to remember one thing. When it comes to the children and families we serve, they need the same things that you and I needed. We should give our families the same things we would give our own children. Nothing less. Love, belonging, access. I've got your back. Final slide. Relationships heal. Nothing heals pain but a relationship. Emotional pain does not subside in loneliness. It just gets worse. It just gets worse. Relationships heal. To anyone who tells you otherwise, call them a liar. Relationships heal. Nothing else heals. If we are not in the relationship game for our young people, we are lying to ourselves and to others. Thank you. Do we have time for questions? We do? All right. Okay, happy to take a question or two or... Yes.
So thank you. I think the three of us sitting here echoes sort of everyone we see every day. I think one of the challenges that we have sometimes is well-meaning folks will provide a roof, three meals, a safe place, and then don't understand why the love is not immediately, sort of between the two. And I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit, or sort of ideas on.
Yeah. So we spoke about this briefly yesterday. This is really challenging because good intent is good intent, right? We don't want to undermine good intent. But I think we need to educate good intent. And the way we approach this problem, because we actually don't develop foster homes anymore for very young children. We ask our foster parents, we're out there preaching the message that we want foster parents for older young people, because that's where we think we bring the best bang for the buck. What has worked for us, and it's not perfect, is this concept of moral conviction. If you say yes to a child, if you want to be a foster parent, are you willing to make a statement that you have a moral conviction that this child is important? That it's not about the cot and the roof and the three hots, right? A moral conviction that the relationship begins the moment you meet them. If you're not in the moral conviction game, I'd rather you do respite than be a foster parent. And we need respite. So we've just started doing this in the last 5 years, and we're getting a little traction here. So we have families that say, I'll do respite. And then we have others that say, no, I want to get to know her. Like, I really want to. So I think we have to go beyond the system language and tug on those heartstrings to say, if this was your child.
So we also have question cards on your table. So if you want to write your question down, Allie will help come around and pick up questions too. And you have some that we already received, Dr. K, if you don't mind.
Great. Dan, can I get one there with Dan?
I'll shout.
Because he's a big sponsorer and a friend and a colleague.
Just, if you could talk a little bit about the importance of belonging for the kids at Children's Village and the things that you've done to try to keep them connected with people in their lives, in their family, and their community.
Right. I think there are three things that we do at Children's Village that works well for us. The first is we tell young people, we're not your family, we don't want to be, and let's not even pretend that we are. The second is we don't ask them to trust us, because that's wrong, they can't. We ask them to try and tell us as much about their lives as they could. So we have our entire team that's focused on trying to understand family and find family. Do you remember, did you have a pastor? Did you have a youth pastor? Did you have a family friend? Did you have a rabbi? Did you have a imam? Did you have a school teacher? Do you remember your neighborhood? Do you have family elsewhere? And then the last thing we do, and this is thanks to our donors, we created a slush fund to simply fly family, or anyone that claims to be family, to the Hilton Garden Inn and meet the kids. We are Diamond Honors members there all day long. I mean, we have families coming from all over, from the Carolinas. Or we'll fly young people over. But because, hey, look, you need money to do this work. The challenge here is you can complain about the limits of government funding, and there are good reasons why there are limits, and say that's where my work stops. Or you say, we got to go with that moral conviction that this child needs family and do all the things you need to do. Because families are worried about burden, financial burden, and I'll tell you, 50% of the time, they didn't even know that the child was in foster care because the family was estranged, especially if they're coming from a southern or a Midwestern state. You know, a family moves up there, domestic violence, you know, mom moves with a boyfriend who treats her badly. She's too embarrassed to let the family back home know that things are not working out. The kids are in foster care, and they're like, what? How could that happen? So, not a perfect solution, but. Oh.
I have a question. I'll use the microphone. Maybe I'll use it. Am I in the wrong spot? Okay.
Maybe you need to be here.
So first of all, Emily Madeir, most of you know Emily. Emily works for the Department of Social Services, and she's in charge of all the children in placement, and has a more sophisticated title than that, but that's not her. So thank you, Emily, for moderating the Q&A. Dr. K, one of the things that really impressed me that I thought was exciting, and I would love to hear you talk about for our system, is the concept of unlimited aftercare. Can you share a little bit about that and the vision and where it came from and what you're doing?
Sure. It came from our realization that when you don't have belonging and you've been in the system for a long time, there is no way to catch up on that time lost. You know, you've got this big gap in your life. It's a gap of exposure. It's the gap of confidence. Look, our confidence in life comes from the people that love us, right? Our strength in life comes from the people that love us because they teach us how to face the world, how to fight those battles, how to be strong, how to be weak, when to be vulnerable. When you're in the system, you learn none of that. You learn none of that. And we had donors, and we have great donors that would constantly ask us, like, why aren't they going to college? You're spending, and they're right. I mean, the money we get for children, we can, if Harvard would take them, we could pay them like through Harvard and buy them a house in Boston over time. I mean, it's crazy. And so they are right. And as we looked into this, and we had a lot of focus groups on this, we realized what they needed was the same thing that my children need, is someone to fall back on. Not often, but occasionally. Because all they wanted to know was somebody's got my back, right? That's all they want to know. They're willing to kind of go out there and figure this thing out. They know they're starting with a lot of deficit, but they're willing to struggle. They just need to know somebody's got their back. And we went to our trustees and said, look, we raise money, that's what we do. Let's just make a commitment. The anxiety was that it would break the bank. I got to tell you, there hasn't been 1 year in my 17 years at Children's Village where we came close to spending that budget down, because our kids don't ask. Our young people don't ask. And I was telling Bev this story. Just on the day I was coming here yesterday, one did ask, and he lives in North Carolina. He's 35 years old now, and I met him briefly. And he's about to get evicted, and he needs $320. And I said, okay, it's good to talk to you too. We'll make sure you get that money. We are worried because we think the people we serve take advantage of us. I got to tell you, they don't. They're actually embarrassed to ask.
We have a question from the audience, Dr. Cook. So how do you address the idea of belonging with children who may not be in contact or may not be able to contact their family because of court regulations and things like that?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things we try to press on. The first is, in our system, and this is national, we often work with moms and mom's side of the family. But we also have dads, right? All kids have dads somewhere, in some form. So family, searching out for family, going deeper helps in those instances. And when all fails, and we do have kids that say, nope, I don't want my family. then it's incumbent on us to find that family that has the moral conviction that that young person can be theirs. And that's where the heavy lift is. Yeah. We're making Emily work.
Probably won't need a microphone, I have a loud voice. But can you talk a little bit about, you talked about the relationship between poverty, neglect, and substance abuse. Are there innovative solutions to that problem to prevent kids from getting removed?
Yes, we think so, and there are probably smarter answers in this room than the one I'm going to give you on that. To us, we think talking about it is the first piece, because we got to, it's one thing to talk about neglect, poverty, but then we've also got to, walk and chew gum, right? There are problems with that analogy. We can't leave kids at risk. So the first thing we need to do is train ourselves to remember that when substance abuse is involved, that there's confound. And we need to understand what that confound is. The first question we ask is this individual, this guardian, this parent, this mom, this dad, socially isolated? We've got to rule out social isolation, because in our middle class and upper middle class families, we don't remove children because we identify support very quickly. So dad's got substance abuse problems, but there are a lot of other people in the family that's got eyes on those kids. And so we're not as afraid. Our poorer families, the first question we ask, is social isolation a factor? If it is, we've got to address that. And that's where, it's just a lot of grunt work. It could be after-school programs, it could be respite type programs, it could be day programming, it could be contracting with the dad or the mom for treatment and getting another family member in there. We haven't found a magic or a silver bullet to that, but we think the first priority is identify the support network or the lack of support. Do you need them?
I don't think so.
Hey, yeah, okay.
I think I see that you don't know this, but my grandpa was a resident of
the Charleston Orphan House. And my question is, how do we change the narrative and the perception of trauma that is passed down generationally, that poverty is traumatic, that there is an issue if you find yourself like in the Charleston Orphan House?
Help me understand the question a little bit more. Are you asking, is poverty intergenerational, or?
So I think my question is, how do we change the narrative that just because you grow up in poverty, you may not be traumatized, so to speak? How do you?
Yeah, by
I think she's talking about, but how do we get away from the, kind of the stigma?
we,
Have had a placement, and we talked about that a little bit last.
I love that question. You know what? The way to do it is to remind ourselves that poverty is not brokenness. Poverty is not brokenness. Poverty is not leprosy. Poverty is not, Gitmo. Right? You're not locked, especially here in the United States. We have millions of families that have lifted themselves out of poverty, of all colors and all races, and some of them have suffered tremendously in that journey, right? Tremendously to get to where they are today. In this country, where millions still want to come, billions want to come, for us to look at certain groups who are poor and think of them as so different to us is embarrassing to me. And I should say that to me, being an American is my second most important identity, because I loved the day my parents said, "This is home." I was like, yes. I don't want to live in London or Sweden. This is where I want to live, because it's an amazing place. But we still treat so many people so badly, and it causes so much anxiety, so much anger, and so much loss.
Can you share the comment that you made, the quote from your mother that you shared last night about the perception of poor in the United States?
Okay, thank God I had that before that first wine glass. That was, yeah, you know, my mom has been an incredible powerhouse in my thinking. When I spoke to her about the group home that I was in, she made an observation that was incredible for someone who had lost so much in her life. She said, son, in the United States, poor people get things that look and feel poor. In the United States, poor people get things that look and feel poor. I've never forgotten that. It's changed my thinking. It is so true, which is why, you know, no matter how hard we work, our system is so difficult for the people we serve. It has no customer service, even on its best day. It's because that's what we've been trained to do. We give poor people things that look and feel poor. How would they ever aspire for more if that's all they know?
Can we turn the conversation to family first?
Oh boy. Here.
We're several years into implementation now. South Carolina is unpacking the Family First Prevention Services Act, and we're creating new systems and new pathways. You were the author of this plan.
Just a small piece, the QRTP.
That's a huge piece. The Qualified Residential Treatment Program is a huge piece. Where do you see implementation going south? What are lessons learned? How do we, when we start to tackle it and unpack it here in South Carolina, where are the pitfalls that we should be aware of? And how can we do better?
Yeah. Well, I'll start by saying, now that I know you, I'm glad South Carolina has you, because like anything, this will come down to leadership and conviction. It will come down to leadership and conviction. Family First, to those of you who don't know, attempts to do three things. One, change the way we think about families by incentivizing federal money to keep the family together, only remove at last resort. Two, it created very, very strict criteria on when children should be identified as needing residential care, and along with that criteria, set time limits, which we played a big role in identifying through our experience. And three, and most important, it creates an opportunity for us to identify children who need the service and say, rather than taking that child away, let's bring that federal money to wrap ourselves around them for at least 12 months and see. So there are two components tied directly to what happens with the family and the child, and one component that's tied directly to funding. Because the problem was that residential care was taking up so much of the money from the system that we did not have money, especially in states like South Carolina, to build the preventive network to help kids stay. Some agencies will struggle with this because they won't be able to change their thinking away from residential care. They won't. It's like the group that said that the world was flat. I mean, they still say it. I see it on TikTok. My daughter showed me a video. They're still convinced that the world is flat. I mean, they just haven't gone on over the other side yet. What can you do? So they will continue to think that residential care is the only way, because they will continue to point to the absence of the preventive network. They'll be like, well, you know, they send the state sends the kids to me, so I'm just caring for them, and well, the state isn't paying me enough, or you know, if we got more money. On the other side, we'll have a group that will look at Family First and say, this is interesting to us. We don't want to do anything with residential care anymore. We're just going to do community-based work. And I've seen a number of, in New York, we have 2 large institutions that sold, Graham Wyndham sold their property, Leake and Watts, now called Rising Ground, sold their property. They are completely out of the game. In the middle will be organizations like you and us that recognize that good residential care is an emergency room. You come there to get treatment and you run away, because if you stay in an emergency room for too long, you're going to leave with a disease you didn't come with, right? Which is why we don't stay in emergency rooms for too long. You go, you get the treatment, and you leave, and we're going to start building that network, using the money to build that network, including, I hope, housing, because where you live matters. Where you live matters. And that group, I think, will define the next 40 years of our system, because we need a small sliver of residential care that is responsive, but people who do residential care do the most difficult work in the system. To those of you who don't know residential care, let me tell you, it is the most difficult work we do. They bring amazing capacity. Residential agencies have incredible capacity if they're committed.
So I think we have time for one more question, but if you have a question that didn't get answered, please make sure you put it on your question card, because I've been told that we will make sure, the CYDC team will make sure that all your questions get answered. So put it on the question card, raise your hand, and Ali will help us collect those. So for our last question, Dr. K, this person says, a few years ago, I heard you mention that you were testing a no reject, no eject program with DJJ Juvenile Justice. Can you share an update on that program and any lessons learned or advice to consider?
Oh, I love it. I was told this was coming, so I'm prepared. We do have a no eject, no reject, but let me phrase this, right? So no eject, no reject is a concept that takes work, because true no eject, no reject would be Guantanamo Bay. I mean, you'll have to put kids in shackles and chain them to the wall. I mean, what are you going to do? True, no eject, no reject is an important concept for our work, because we need providers that can step up and serve those children, but there's some work to be done, and we've done the work, so I can tell you what it took for us. The first was that our commissioner, you call them directors here, our commissioners agreed with us that no eject, no reject was a shared risk responsibility. That they were not shipping children to Children's Village, and Children's Village is not Guantanamo Bay. If I got a kid that I simply could not serve, and my commissioner didn't care about that, because of whatever reason, A, I didn't have the treatment that child deserved, that child was not ready to work with us, or that child comes from a gang and I've already got 3 other gang members from another gang right there. I'm like, yeah, you know, that's... so shared responsibility of risk is very important. There's no way for a private provider, no matter how well equipped you are, to do this alone. The second is, and we had philanthropy that helped us, we had to develop an investment strategy for our staff, because our staff were like, the term scares the heck out of them. They were like, what kind of people are you going to bring here, and how do you expect me to do that work? And we found that as we trained staff, there were 2 qualities that rose to the top. One was personality, right? There are some amazing staff on our front line. They run to the problem. They run. They know how to connect with kids. They have personality that engages young people. They're like, let me please put that brick down. And the kid puts the brick down. Like, great. So staff personality, and then give the staff the tools. So what happens after that kid puts that brick down? Because he or she, we have a lot of amazing women that do this. She can't be like standing next to him and the brick. Like, what else is going to happen now? Because we've de-escalated that situation. So investment in staff, investment in treatment modalities is important. If the director sends me a young person that has problematic sexual behavior because she was a victim of horrific abuse, and we see this all the time, and I don't have a program that meets her needs, well, we're lying to her and to ourselves by taking that bed. So it has to be an investment in treatment. We have to be responsive to the mix of youth in the program. You can't put 5 young people that are on the edge all the time and expect improvement. I mean, that's called contagion. Now you have a real problem. So responsiveness to the mix of youth, and then of course a commitment to following evidence. Because what works in no eject, no reject is that young person understanding one important concept. This is your last stop. Work with me. This is your last stop. Work with me. I know you've had 35 others. I know people have promised you stuff, but this is your last stop. Please work with me. And here is why. When those conditions are met, I could show you. I mean, I was just looking at our shift report. I had a young man that was out biking at 3 a.m. Now, when I was coming up in residential, if there was a kid that got out of the bed at 3 a.m. and went out to ride, somebody would have taken him down because the staff did not want to be up at 3 a.m. running after kids. But said that 2 staff members were watching while he was riding the bike around the compound. I was like, great, because he has nowhere else to go. If all he wants to do is ride at 3 o'clock in the morning and that allows him to sleep till 7 in the morning, I'm fine with that.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hayes.
Thank you all.